Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on strengthening participation, representation, leadership of local and national actors in the IASC Humanitarian Coordination Mechanism. That's a long title. My name is Alix Masson. I'm advocacy lead for the Network for Empowered Aid Response. We are Global South network of local and national NGOs, and I'm very happy to moderate this session today. So welcome everyone. As I have mentioned in the chat, if you're not familiar with WebEx, just look at the technical tips on the screen. I'm not sure I'm going to comment on them, but just invite you to look at them so that it might make your experience with WebEx easier. I just want to also inform everyone that this session is recorded, so that everybody is informed. We have one of our participants, Ring, hi Ring, who has started to introduce himself in the chat. Please do the same so that you get to know who is on this call and who is going to hopefully contribute to our session. So this afternoon, we're going to have, I hope, a very exciting conversation around, I'm not going to repeat the title, but basically what I would call around local leadership in coordination mechanisms, especially IASC coordination mechanisms in the humanitarian sector. We have today with us a number of speakers who are going to introduce you a number of pieces of work that have been done. So I would say that our hour together today is going to be divided in three parts, unequal in terms of time, but I think three parts. One first part, we're going to hear from Dulma Farah. She's a partnership and grant manager at the Somalia NGO Consortium. She's also the co-chair of the IASC Result Group 1 on operational response subgroup localization. And she is basically gonna share with us her understanding of challenges of local and national actors and what they are facing in terms of coordination mechanism, especially accessing coordination mechanism. So that's going to be a way for us to set the scene. The second part of our hour together, sorry for that, we're going to hear from three different speakers. We're going to hear from the other co-chair of the subgroup of the Result Group 1, Mrs. Stella Ogunlade. And she's going to present both a bit the work that this subgroup has been doing, and she's going to focus really on presenting the draft guidance on meaningful engagement, participation of local actors in humanitarian coordination mechanism. She's going to be followed by Mrs. Marina Skurik-Prodanovic, who is going to present specifically the role of OCHA in this upcoming guidance, focusing mostly on monitoring and tracking indicators and creating a baseline. And then last but not least, Mr. Philippe Descourt is going to take us through a draft framework for engagement of local governments with humanitarian actors. So this is another block. It's going to be rather fast, so don't be too worried. And then the last block of our hour together is not so much what I would call a Q&A, because the idea is not so much to have questions on those different documents. We hope that we're going to provide enough information, but really to hear from you about how do we move forward with this guidance? How do we move forward with this framework that are there to help all of us for better inclusion, for better balance? So we would love to hear from all the people on the call, especially local and national NGOs, their networks, on best practices, on involvement and involvement of local and national actors in coordination mechanisms, but also how to disseminate such guidance, and then how to organize feedback. You know, once the guidance is in place, once it starts being operationalized, how do we hear about that? So that's a bit our hour, and for that last part, we'll have roughly half an hour. So I think that should provide us ample time for you to share what your experience is and your suggestions. I'm going to stop here. To start off, we want to show you a little movie that was done for the week in particular, and that's giving the voice to local and national NGOs, national actors on localization, so that we all hear the same voices from the field.
Local actors are critical as first responders and providers of long-term support. Localization is about ensuring local actors meaningfully participate and lead coordination.
لدينا فهم قوي للتحديات والحلول المحلية. نقوم بالحشد لشبكاتنا المحلية ونوفر وصولاً أكبر. نلعب دوراً مهماً في بيئات مختلفة مثل المناطق الحضرية. قبل كل شيء نساهم في استجابة أكثر فاعلية وقائمة على المبادئ.
naye wankubadde tukola omulimu ogwo tusoomozebwa tetulabibwa ng'abantu abalina kye bakola. Kaakano tusaba twongerebwe ku ssente ezigenda otuyamba emirimu gyaffe, tukenderezebwe ku bukwakulizo bubeera buteekeddwawo okufuna ensimbi okukola emirimu gino, era nga tusaba bannaffe abalala ab'ebitongole ebirala ebyannakyewa eby'amawanga amalala bulijjo tukolere wamu.
Esta es solo una pequeña muestra de algunos de los aspectos de localización que serán discutidos en la Semana de Redes y Alianzas Humanitarias de este año. Acompáñennos y ayúdennos a mover la aguja hacia la localización.
Thank you so much, Lara, for sharing that video. I think that it really covers in less than a minute and a half really what are the challenges that we are facing and the work that remains to be done. And I find it always very inspiring to see such strong female leaders. So thank you so much for that. Dulma, I think without much more comments from my side, I'll invite you to help us to set the scene on the challenges that local and national actors are facing when wanting to access and engage with IASC coordination mechanisms.
Thank you,
The
Alex.
floor is yours.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. I'm glad to see all these participants joining our forum today. So I'll start my session. Having worked in humanitarian development space in Somalia, in my current capacity as partnerships and grants manager, we have encountered multiple challenges that local actors face in terms of participation and engagement Our experience from a wide range of humanitarian settings shows that active engagement by the humanitarian local and national actors in coordination structures improves the quality and coverage of our response. However, local actors face barriers to participation and representation. So I would go ahead and discuss most of the barriers that we faced, and I will use Somalia as one of as context. We have an issue with language barrier where there's a heavy use of jargon, which impacts delivery of key messages. And many local actors do not have English as their first language and cannot afford services of an interpreter. Therefore, the messages that are put across do not reach the intended audience and have the expected impact. We also have cultural and political differences, which leads to obviously reduced inclusivity and dialogue. Right now, as we speak in Somalia, there's a political stalemate as we speak right now because we're in a transition, and that does affect coordination mechanisms within the country. We have social and cultural discrimination, especially gender, as women are not given the platform to discuss localization, and women have also reduced participation and representation in important coordination platforms. There is some form of representation of women, but we are not where we want to be. We would like to have more women on these platforms, on these coordination mechanisms. We also have issues with logistical and technological obstacles. Logistically, we're not able to access some areas that are maybe probably under the control of Al-Shabaab, or there could be issues, explosions that happen. And what happens is there's multiple roadblocks and we're not able to go to for important meetings, let's say with specific ministries, and that affects in coordination. Then technological obstacles is where you have issues where people don't have laptops, or some local actors don't have laptops, or they have limited access to internet in remote areas, or internet is fluctuating. One of the major issues we have in Somalia is also security and restricted movement as a challenge, which is a major challenge because then there could be explosions, as I said, and there could be bombs that go off, and then certain roads and certain areas are closed off. We're not able to hold meetings with local actors. We're not able to meet and discuss important aspects of coordination. And then finally, there are resource and capacity constraints due to limited access to funding, especially now that there's a global slowdown due to COVID. There has been a reduced funding. Then I'll move forward to discuss, as co-chair of the RG Group 1 on localization, I'd like to inform you that we will include local actors in our group to increase local actor participation in the RG Group 1 on localization. We have selected a number of 8 local actors who will join us, and we picked applicants based on a range of criteria. We focus mostly on whether they have experience in coordination, and we try to take as many people from most regions. So we're happy that's going to happen soon. I'd like to thank you. That's the end of my session. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Dulma. So I think I heard in the list of challenges you made, I heard a lot of the elements that are very common across the board, and then are very context specific. But in terms of type of challenges, this is really what we hear across the board when we talk with Global South, local and national NGOs. So thank you so much for that. And yes, very excited to have new people joining, local and national NGOs joining us in the subgroup, and also to say that we have 4 women joining us. So not only men, but also 4 men, 4 women. So that's also very exciting. Thanks a lot, Dulma. So thanks for setting the scene for all of us. And you already started to introduce some of the work that the RG1 subgroup on localization did on bringing local and national NGOs on board. Now I'm going to ask Stella Ogulande, the other co-chair, to tell us a bit more about some of other pieces of work that have been done by the RG1 subgroup localization. Over to you, Stella.
Thank you very much, Alex. So together with the NGO consortia that Dulma just presented, we took over the subgroup last September, and we were already given some specific tasks by OPAC that we were to implement. And so I just want to quickly run you through those tasks and where we are. The first task was to really to establish an information repository on localization. So maybe we can have the slide before so that you can see where you can actually find it. We established it on the Relief website, and it might also have a link to the IASC website. And it really has a lot of guidance, good practices, training materials, policy papers, and so forth on this topic. But we would also really welcome anybody of you today on this call to share whatever you have with Melissa and Tamara mentioned on the slide, because we would like it to be as comprehensive as possible. Secondly, we were asked to operationalize the guidance, the IASC guidance on localization and the COVID response that was actually developed last year. And we did our best to raise more awareness on it, including by participating in certain webinars, for example, for humanitarian country teams and of the Great Bargain work stream. We sent letters again around to the emergency directors, to clusters, to OPAC members and so forth, to remobilize the application of it. But if you have specific feedback on how that went, that we can also use when we are now looking at the coordination guidance, then that would be really appreciated. And finally, we continue to work on the framework on engagement with local actors, and that's something that my colleague Philippe in a few minutes will tell you more about. I would like to tell you a little bit more about the guidance on strengthening participation, representation, and leadership of local actors in IASC coordination mechanism. It was developed by a consultant that actually ICWA recruited, that really reviewed more than 500 documents that are already out there on this topic, in order to ensure that we really look at where the gaps are and that we're not reinventing the wheel, and that we really come up with some very action-oriented orientation in this guidance. We had a little working group of the subgroup that then further developed it, where different UN agencies, NGO consortia, NGOs, and so forth participated. And then we came up with a first draft that we shared with different results group of the IASC, with the global clusters, with Great Bargain workstream members, with NGOs and NGO consortia. And we also got it, thanks to the education cluster, translated in several languages, and have a near network having consultation in those different languages with more than 100 local actors to further receive their feedback. So overall, we ended up with more than 500 comments, 97 pages that we went through, and that we tried our best to address as much as we could. That, of course, extended also the length of the document that now has 19 pages, while it was a bit shorter before, but that also includes certain contents and glossary and so forth. So now this document has been presented to OPAC on the 24th of March, and now will be further shared with OPAC members for any red line comments before we hopefully get it endorsed by IASC and can officially share it with all of you. The key components of this guidance are, of course, a first introduction that really re-emphasizes the principles of equal partnerships, and that also defines to whom it is applicable and who do we mean. So we're really referring to national NGOs, to women-led organizations and women rights organizations, but also any other led organizations by marginalized groups, so like LGBTI or other diversity groups, youth groups, person of older persons, groups of older persons, and so forth. But we also address it to local actors where it is applicable, as well as to development actors in the private sector when they contribute to the humanitarian response in a certain context. It has, as I said before, very action-oriented recommendations. All of them have indicators, and now humanitarian country teams are asked to actually look on the implementation of these indicators and to report on it. And my colleague Marina will tell you much more about how that will work. Quickly running you through the chapters. The first one is on participation and representation. So here we like to address certain things that Nolma just mentioned, just as if it's possible, can we provide interpretation? Can we avoid jargon and abbreviations in our use? Can we improve our communication? Can we consider the logistic constraints that local actors have, including by maybe even providing respective support and the security issues that were mentioned by Nolma? And can we share more information? Can we have some induction trainings or briefings that help local actors to orient themselves in our coordination mechanism and the respective planning and reporting that we have? Then we have a chapter on leadership that clearly stipulates that we should have a very fair and transparent selection process of those local actors that will participate in country teams or in clusters, and that we should also consider, where possible, to have co-leadership of clusters and other coordination working groups and so forth. Then we have a chapter on capacity strengthening, and here's really the emphasis that we want a two-way approach. So we're saying it's not only international actors, training national actors, it's also national actors that they have to train us. And we should not only look at webinars or one-off workshops, but actually really do a proper needs assessment, and based on that, look at all kinds of different and innovative means even to share capacity. And that can be also mentoring, any peer-to-peer approaches, shadowing, twinning, and so forth. Then we have a small chapter on resourcing for coordination. And here I just want to emphasize the guidance is not on funding for local actors, although we completely understand that this is one, if not the biggest challenge that local actors face. But this is really about coordination. So we only mention certain activities that are specific for coordination. And that can be, for example, respective staffing. That needs to be resourced, but we don't elaborate on all the other funding needs that local actors have. And then we talk about visibility, and that's very important to acknowledge all the achievement that local actors have, including in any kind of donor-related reports or during donor missions and briefings and so forth, but of course also in the media. And then finally, we have a chapter on preparedness, response, and humanitarian development peace collaboration, which emphasizes that we need to work together from early on. So from the moment we develop our contingency plans or any kind of preparedness measures, over to the response and over to the transition, but also in any kinds of related documents that we have, our needs assessments, our humanitarian response plans, and so forth. All of this should be done always together. And finally, we have a chapter on monitoring and accountability, and there it is really about how do we monitor that this guidance is actually implemented and who's accountable. And this is, of course, the humanitarian coordinator and the country team members, but it's also local actors. So we share that accountability. And like I said, we have indicators to now see the progress on it. And Marina will talk more about it. So back to you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Stella. I hope that everyone on the call who is not familiar with the work of the RG1 subgroup on localization and its guidance in particular got a bit of a better sense of what it tries to achieve and what it contains. And I'll give the floor immediately to Marina to take us a bit more in depth into the monitoring and the baseline. Right now, to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. So I'll be very brief. One is, as Stella's already said, we've tried to make this as practical as possible. The moment we set out to work on guidance, we're on how you measure in a meaningful fashion. And then by measuring, we mean something that's simple, that's easily used, where the effort taken to collect the information does not exceed the use of the information. And there's a lot of interesting things people wanted to know, but we really tried to use the most, I think, pragmatic methodology we could of something that was already collected and something that perhaps might not be collected. So there are two aspects to this. One is OCHA, together with the clusters, already does an annual global collection exercise where mechanisms across all IASC contexts. So this is a natural place where we collect a whole host of different data points, it was a natural place to start to make sure that we disaggregated information related to local actors, perhaps more than we had disaggregated before. So that was our first action point, and one that we've already, even though the guidance has not been fully endorsed, and we still need to go through the last loop within the IASC in terms of being endorsed, we've already started adjusting our collection of information to allow us to do that. So that would mean that across 30 settings this year, which are considered IASC settings, we would be able to collect and look at what is the information telling us on localization. And of course, now the responsibility for that then lies with OCHA, but also the clusters, the humanitarian country teams. When coordination is one's middle name, so we do feel that there is a responsibility in OCHA to also support this. It is not the only actor. There's lots of actors making this happen, including the clusters, cluster lead agencies, all the humanitarian actors in the field. But in terms of the collection, we will use this IASC coordination mapping, and we feel that will give us a good base. The idea is that year one or year zero, however you want to call it, with this year, that by quarter three, we will be able to look at this information and say, so the information would be with humanitarian country teams. It would also be with other actors in the field to make sure that what is actually being collected and suggested at target is actually manageable. And then the second set of monitoring would be, we realized that a lot of humanitarian country teams are already collecting different other, more perhaps deeper aspects of data. So some of them already have qualitative surveys, some may not. We know that some of them are thinking about localization, markers, trackers, there's different terminology being used. And there we would expect that actors on the ground will collect this. They may want to go deeper because they would adjust it to local context and would be able to do that. I see there's already a question which I'm going to try to respond to. So this guidance applies to IASC contexts. I will let Stella, who represents UNHCR, to talk about refugee context, but the guidance, I think, is very clear. It has been developed within the IASC and IASC setting, and it applies to IASC coordination contexts as we would like them. Obviously, UNHCR may have a presence in those contexts, but for refugee contexts, I'll let Stella talk to that. So I'll finish up here and hand it back to you, Alex, to take us through the rest of the session, and then happy to address any other questions you may have. Back to you.
Thank you, Marina. Thank you so much for that. I think that's really helpful, and thank you for the great question, I think, on how do we know, how do we get data from other contexts that are also very relevant on engagement of local and national NGOs. So hopefully this is something we'll have some time to address later on. But one thing that I didn't mention earlier, but we are taking all the questions on board. We might not be able to answer all of them, and we do apologize for that. But they will be brought back to the subgroup to really help us in thinking and answering questions that we may not have thought about. So don't hesitate to continue to ask questions. And again, our apologies if we can't go through all the questions. Now we're moving to another part of our conversation, thanks to Philippe Descotes, and he's going to take us through the framework for engagement between local government and humanitarian actors. The floor is yours, Philippe.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for joining. To make ideas of localization real. And I will never forget, once we had discussed a previous version of this document with local governments, we actually got the question or the comment, this is not about localizing your international systems. what we would like to talk about is how you can support our local efforts. So basically turning localization on its head. At the Humanitarian Summit, exactly, we had launched the Global Alliance for Urban Crisis, and it was very much about finding a way to bring the role of local governments to the fore by having them part of the discussion from the start. So they co-founded the Alliance for Urban Crisis together with UN Habitat, IFRC, and the International Rescue Committee. This was one of the pieces of work we've done. We worked also on urban profiling, which is how do we come to a better shared understanding on urban crisis context. But we also knew that there was a lot of distrust and mistrust between local governments and humanitarian actors. It was important to find common ground to really strengthen that collaboration. Now, key, of course, is that contextualization is everything. There's not a single format for a local government. We have conflict situations, we have natural disaster situations, we have local governments that are strong, that are weak, that have a strong mandate from central government, have a weak mandate, that have a conflict with national government. So very important is contextualized. Now, the work we had done through the Global Alliance for Urban Crisis had gone through a lot of consultation, including in previous versions of this Humanitarian Networks and Partnerships Week. But now we have come to the point where we actually want something to be validated by the Interagency Standing Committee. So we've taken this through the results group 1 on localization, and it has 2 parts. One, really high-level statements of principles and commitments we would like the IASC principles to get behind. And equally, this would be mirrored by commitments made by the most important network of local governments globally, United Cities and local governments. So finding a common ground on understanding each other's background and perspectives, and then have that as a common starting point. Now, the second part is the most practical part, is basically the principles and commitments mean nothing, of course, if they're not brought down to a specific context. And there is a conversation happening between humanitarian actors and local governments on the ground on what that collaboration can look like. What are the most important points of interaction? And we've used the humanitarian programming cycle to organize that guidance note. You will see it's about 12 pages, highlighting some questions, highlighting some issues for consideration that can guide the local conversation. The outcome of that conversation can be as simple as an improved understanding, or it could result in some kind of document really kind of articulating the collaboration commitments at the local level between a local government and the humanitarian actors, and actually articulating each other's roles and responsibilities in going forward. What has come out of this is that these discussions and this consultation around the framework have been very useful between local governments and humanitarian actors to actually start finding a common language, understanding on their side the humanitarian principles better, where we're coming from as humanitarian actors, but also, of course, for the humanitarian actors to understand the perspectives and the time frames that local governments are dealing with. And we believe that by rolling this out, we very much look forward to kind of collecting learning experiences and have this as a starting point. I'm not sure if everything worked until the end, what I was saying, because I lost.
No, we lost you for a bit, Philip. So maybe we lost you, I think, for the last 20 seconds or something like this.
No, it's okay. I mean, my final point was just, we really hope that the focus will also be on kind of ongoing learning on those experiences of dialogue between the 2 sides. Over.
Thank you so much, Philippe. And thank you so much for putting a lot of emphasis on the necessity of dialogue between the different actors. I think that ultimately and that's also part of what has been experienced and discussed a lot in the other document we have been discussing today, the guidance notes. It's a lot about a dialogue and a mutual respectful dialogue between the different actors and really learning from each other. So thank you so much for putting that at the center as well. So I want to thank Dulma, Stella, Marina, and Philippe for sharing with us the results in a very short time, but the result of long months of work and dedications and consultation and engagement with hundreds of actors for Truthfully. So now we are moving to our second part. And I hope that while listening to the different documents that are being developed, you've been thinking of existing best practices, for example, that you know of, that you would want to share around the engagement of local and national actors in IASC coordination mechanisms, but also some elements of thinking and some perspective from you on how would you go about the dissemination of such a guidance, right? Because we know that guidance are developed at the global level and then they move to national level, but then how really in country you think this could be done effectively. And we would love to hear from some of your experience, of some of your suggestions, and of course also on how, when we start implementing such guidance, how it can be given feedback on, because of course this has to be a living document, right? And we need to be able to learn from what we are doing together. So I see that we do have a lot of questions. We have a lot of questions in the chat. Some of the questions are going to be answered directly in the chat by the different speaker. So I know Marina is going to answer one, and then I know Philippe will answer the specific one about the framework in the chat. But we would really love to hear from some of you who are on the call, and I recognize a number of local and national NGOs, but also a lot of colleagues from different backgrounds and places in the world. And we would really love to hear your contributions to the different elements around dissemination, around learning and feedback, best practices. So I'm going to open the floor. I'll ask you to present yourself very quickly, just your name, your organization, your country, so that we understand also where the example comes from, so that we are quite clear. And I apologize in advance, but if you're a bit long in your suggestion or your point, unfortunately, I'll have to ask you to shorten it so that we can get as many people as possible to speak. Who would want to take the floor? You can also raise your hand. I think there is an option to raise your hand. And if you don't find how to raise your hand, you can always just unmute yourself. Share reaction. I cannot believe that none of you has anything to contribute. That's not a possibility. Or has no good experience on how, no best practice on how local and national actors were involved, engaged, included in IASC coordination mechanisms. Now you're going to put all of us to shame. So we have, hello?
Yes.
Hi, Wafa. Great
Hi,
to
Wafa.
hear from you. Hi.
This is Wafa. Hi, how are you? This is Wafa from Apps Development for Women and Children, Yemen. We just say that about the coordination that you already do with whether local or international NGO. But before, as I said, that EDO is a national organization. And you know the Yemen conflict, so we much more have a lot of work humanitarian. So mostly when we do the coordination, whether with the internationals or the national, or we want to do the implementation, we have to go through the cluster. This is the main platform. Then we can do the other coordination with their between the organization when we want to get a fund, for example, or we want to respond quickly. For example, if there is a crisis, something or happen emergency, we go together and we discuss, and the organization that's working in the same place. And if we are talking in the points of view regarding to the funds, whether to communicate directly to the donor or to the international NGO, or we can go through also cluster view, because sometimes they do the chances there. Now we're starting in ADO to do with networks like NIR. We are starting to be a member with them, and also ICFA. So to just widen and have more experience and to get more good practice during our works. Over.
Thank you so much, Wafa. I think it's really interesting to hear from an organization that is starting to do that, and maybe Wafa could, I mean, unless someone else has something, but maybe Wafa, can I ask you what are the main challenges that when you started to do that work as apps? What are the main challenges that you experienced, and how did you manage, really?
There is different challenges, depend on the situation. Sometimes the politics, sometimes the regions where we are working, because we have now as two separate places. And also sometimes from the donor itself, we cannot, they are changing the policy, but we are trying to update one by one during our works, so we can get a solution between us and them, so we can be implemented in a good way. But if it is related, for example, to the government, sometimes you cannot do anything, but we try to raise it, especially if it is for more than one organization. We can also ask the cluster if there is something that it's over our capacity, so we have to go through them to ask them for them help, because we are national NGO, and sometimes our voice is not that too strong like international. So sometimes really the cluster do help.
And usually your experience, Wafa, has been that the cluster has been responsive to your needs, and they have been supporting you, or it has been a bit difficult for you to yes, have them listening to you?
No, they are really supporting us, and we also taking their supports. Sometimes the support's not too much big, but at least they support us according to their capacity. But they really respond to our need, or at least they are responding to our request.
Thank you so much, Wafa. Really, really appreciate.
Yes, Alex.
Yes, please. Hi, Ring.
Yes, this is Ring from Chido, South Sudan. Mine is a challenge that we have been seeing, especially on the side of the government here in some clusters. It seems the government is relaxing or is not taking actually, greater lead to lead, the different clusters, let me say, because we have different clusters like FSL, nutrition, education, and child protection. So we see their presence and representation is very low sometimes, and we are actually wondering what could be the problem. So this kind of relaxation also gives us other questions. Why? What is the reason of the absence of the government, to be, although, in all clusters, they are the co-lead, the other colleagues, I mean. So this is the challenge that we are seeing, and we don't know how can we handle this, because the government is seeing itself as a passive, participant or maybe listener, to all, but there's no, concrete or active, word or voice in the clusters. That's what I have seen actually. Thank you.
Thank you, Ring. I don't know if anyone would want to suggest something to Ring either in the chat or taking the floor. I'm also inviting everyone to look at the chat. We do have a lot of questions and comments. I've seen that our panelists have taken a strong lead in answering in a lot of the comments. There is a few questions I think that are quite interesting, not necessarily completely connected to what we have been discussing, but there's a question from Xavier. Xavier Genot on the last 12 months and the trend that have been seen in terms of more engagement of local and national actors in clusters. I imagine that this is also with the idea that related to COVID-19, there has been much more, I would say, light shade on local and national actors and seeing how critical they are to responses. So that could be something also quite interesting to hear about and maybe to learn from. There was a guidance released last year, by IASC, exactly around COVID-19 and the role of local and national NGOs, the role of local and national actors. So I don't know if anyone wants to maybe share their experience specifically on this. And then we have another question. Oh, Elizabeth White, sorry. I didn't see the raised hand. I'm not very
no problem.
WebEx savvy. So I don't know where it is actually. Please, Elizabeth.
Yeah, sure. It's not directly related to that last point. And I'm not sure I can call it a kind of successful model or kind of a best practice, but a consideration that we're making. So I work with the NGO Coordination Committee in Iraq, a mixed INGO and national NGO forum. And one of the pieces of this that we are starting to unpick is, on the one hand, supporting national and local actors to engage with the cluster structures and also the newly emerging durable solutions coordination structures in Iraq, which is a slightly different beast, still UN-led, but not OCHA. But the other side of it is that kind of recognizing that these are not localized spaces, these are westernized spaces. So on the one hand, while supporting local and national actors to engage with them, we're also looking at what additional steps need to be taken by the agencies chairing those structures to make the language they're using and the approaches they're taking more locally relevant. So for things, I mean, I saw that Mia from Translators Without Borders mentioned already in the chat box some work that they've been doing around plain language translation. So kind of recognizing it's not just about a language barrier here, primarily between English and Arabic, but also about the kind of terms and jargon that a lot of international agencies and international actors have got so used to using, but really don't resonate or connect with realities for particularly community-based organizations. So trying to take additional steps to unpack that. One of the things that we've been doing as NCCI is literally holding additional sessions with national NGOs engaging in these structures to give them an additional space to raise concerns, questions, areas where they need clarification, in recognition that, yeah, a lot of the things discussed and the way those sessions are framed are incredibly Western-centric. and therefore not particularly accessible, even if the translation is there, but also in recognition of the huge power dynamics in that room. And unless you've got a degree of confidence in grappling with the jargon used and the approaches discussed and all the rest of it, it's very difficult to speak up in that space. So yeah, just to say that from our side, we are really trying to start to focus on those less clear or less visible barriers and looking at ways that the coordination structures can adapt to and take additional steps of equitable support for local and national actors. Given that they've created, I should say, have created a system that is not localized, and therefore it's on us to take additional steps to make it more locally relevant. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Can I ask you a very, very short answered follow-up question? When have you studied those sessions, and did you see that it had an impact on the participation, but also the leadership of local and national NGOs in the cluster meetings themselves? Or is it too recent to really see if it has an impact?
It is recent, and honestly,
Okay.
it's primarily with the new emerging, still UN-led, but durable solutions structures, because this has been such an alien, abstract world for everyone to engage with, but especially national actors. But I think the impact we can say we've seen so far is just hearing from those national NGOs in those spaces. In the initial meetings, they were kind of silent. We would have the side sessions with them to see what they thought, what their issues were, and then off the back of that, maybe do some bilateral conversations with the chairs on the side, and then basically seeing them just start to take a few more steps to participate because they feel more comfortable and informed to do so. Yeah.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks a lot. I'm soon going to close the floor because we have a lot of questions in the chat, and some of our panelists I would love to bring you some answers and some perspective. I also want to thank the different colleagues on the call that have started to also contribute in responding to the different questions, such as the work that is done in the GBV subclusters and things like this. Thanks a lot, Lena. So we do have a lot of really interesting questions. If this is okay with the panelists, I will first give the floor to Marina, because there were a lot of questions, I think, that were somehow addressed to her or that she can answer to very well. And then I will give the floor to all the panelists for their either answers to some of your questions or their concluding remarks. Marina, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Alex. I'm really going to try to cover all the questions. So hopefully I'll succeed. The ones I can answer, I'm sure there's others. So first of all, on this question, I already put the definition is used by the guidance in the chat, so hopefully that helps. We decided not to make a huge difference between local, national, and regional, realizing these categories can also be a bit blurred, and sometimes we have regional actors acting in a local context, some are locally registered, it becomes complicated. So we took a very wide approach to this. And I think, I hope you agree with it, correct? And I know some people are very eager to slice it much more finely, but it brings other complications, and I'm happy to have a very separate and much longer discussion on this bilaterally. But we did think long and hard and looked at the pros and the cons. So that's on that. The other question was, I think, from Xavier, has there been acceleration? I think in terms of certain aspects of a localization, such as membership in HCTs, it's been pretty constant, with some indications of positive progress. I will be able to fully answer that question in 2 months' time when we have crunched and synthesized the information of 2020. Some glimmers of hope, but it's been pretty steady, to be honest. And I think what we need to understand now that we are able to segregate the information much better, I think, in 2021, is why, what's underneath this. So we do know that there are some positive aspects, such as funding has increased. We've got the good indications in terms of CBPFs, country-based pool funds managed by OCHA. SURF has also made movements in terms of international NGOs. So I think there's definitely a lot more, a stronger intent to understand the statistics and what do they mean. Lena has already responded on GBV AOR and what the participation in, which is great. I think we have some that are even higher than that. I think one of the highest ones is 64%, if I believe, for one of the clusters, which I think is a very solid statistic. There's no doubt that more could be done, but it's actually not all doom and gloom. I think participation is quite high. Now, the other aspects of how much do the clusters or other coordination setups localize is a different issue. And I think there, the good practices of the guidance, I think, will be helpful. In short, Xavier, the answer to your question is not that there's been some enormous acceleration. I think we see some positive indications, and I think COVID has also helped us really understand how critical local actors are in this situation. The area-based coordination question is it's much harder. So thank you, Howard, for that one. I think one is, we think by definition, area-based coordination usually functions at the subnational level. So by definition, if you look at how coordination functions, the higher up you go to national, the more international actors you have. And generally, very generally speaking, the more you go subnationally down towards the grassroots, the more you will have local actors. Except, as one of the participants has noticed, you have very heavily internationalized contexts where that might not be true, which is correct. But generally speaking, this is a correct trend that the lower down you go, the more local actors there are. By definition, area-based acts below the national, so at the subnational level or lower. So by definition, by having that, you will actually have more actors active in this area. So if you were to apply area-based coordination, technically you would have a higher percentage of local actors. This is all applying very general principles. I think our knowledge on area-based, and I hope people agree, is still very low. We know some very good contexts where there's some good examples. We know examples of South Sudan and DRC. We also know areas where there are claims that it works, but indications that they don't.
Mine, I'm
I
sorry,
will
I need
stop.
to cut you.
So
Yeah.
the answer, Howard, is mostly probably yes, but we don't actually have the full data. Back to you, Alex.
Thanks a lot, Maina. Sorry, I just want to make sure that we can let everyone go on time, and I really want to give maybe the floor to Stella for short comments, and then I'll ask Philippe. After Stella, I'll ask Philippe to help us think through some of the elements, and last, Dulma. Please be very concise.
Thanks, Alex. No, maybe the only question to respond is the question on the refugee coordination system. And I think Marina has already responded, but just to add, that we are equally also working on a framework on engagement with refugee-led organizations. And that will include coordination aspects and mapping, but also other aspects that are very specific to refugee-led organizations when many countries, for example, have problems to register, and that then affects all the rest in terms of funding and so forth. So just to say that's also coming, and that will complement this guidance. And of course, this guidance will be applicable also in mixed settings, where we have the mixed node. Apart from that, I just wanted to thank everybody for some of the ideas that you have already shared, and the emphasis also on issues of languages and how we communicate, including also mailing lists being inclusive. And just to say, let's maybe also use we shared with you the contact details of Tamara and Melissa. If you have other thoughts that come later today or during the week, maybe you can also share this with us after this meeting. Back to you, Alex. Alex, we can't hear you.
This damn it thing of muting and unmuting myself, right? Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Stella. And yes, please, maybe I'll ask Melissa to copy paste again the email addresses in the chat so that everybody, yes, exactly, super, everybody can have access to them. And just a quick thing, I really love the idea of the plain translation that Translator Without Borders has been putting in place. I think that this is really inspiring in terms of accessibility and inclusivity. Philippe, over to you.
Thanks. So it's quite an interesting discussion. Guide instead of questions on understanding what local governments, what national governments do. It's different in situation, but also maybe a role. Often it's not aligned, and there the international community can definitely help making sure there's complementarity between guidance and what local national governments do versus local governments, and making sure local governments have the space to act. I think that's an important point. I mean, time is up, so I won't add much more, but definitely looking forward to learn from experiences and to make sure that dialogue between humanitarian and local governments takes place. Just to flag that exactly on the issue of jargon and language, that the local governments themselves have developed a humanitarian 101, trying to explain humanitarian principles and humanitarian action to their own constituency. So just to indicate that the importance of making the language accessible is definitely key. Back to you.
Thanks, Philippe. By any chance, if there is a link to this 101 document, I think that if you could find it and put it in the chat, that might be of interest to a lot of people. I think we all look for this kind of guidance that simplify language and explain complex system in an easy way. Dilma, over to you for your words of conclusion.
Thank you, Alex. I think I'll just reiterate what Stella has said and Philippe has said. We need to find solutions to sort of overcome barriers that we are experiencing in terms of coordination for local actors and national actors. And I think that's the most exciting part of this journey, is so that we can get solutions to these problems and issues and be able to enhance coordination. Thank you, Alex. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dilma. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for all your questions. I think that you pointed out in your comments and questions to very critical points, especially around new questions or new horizons, we could say, around coordination mechanisms, how it put forward the area-based coordination. This is seen as a new way to be more inclusive and closer to the field. So I think that those are the sort of follow-up conversations that are going to be really interesting. I really call on all of you to look out for this guidance to soon, when it's going to be adopted, and hopefully in the next month, to start asking about it as well. I think that it's always a two-way process, right? So it's knowing that the guidance is here, but it's also asking for it and see how we can support also as local and national NGOs, local and national actors. So please don't drop that ball. And this is a critical issue. And those are the sort of momentum that really help all of us to work as a community to improve a system that, as was said by Elizabeth, was not necessarily designed in a way to function from a context specific. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our panelists, both for your great interventions and summing up really complex documents and processes in easy and understandable way, but also for all your responses and openness in taking the conversation further. I wish you all a great day, evening, and we are looking forward to continuing the conversations in further settings. Have a great rest of the day.